Even if money doesn't solve everything, it at least helps with many problems. But it certainly doesn't make bad people good. The protagonist of today's story was a rich man, but a very bad one, which unfortunately only worked to his advantage. The small town of Brentwood was about a 20-minute drive from Nashville. This place is known for its natural beauty and ranks among the 20 wealthiest and most prestigious places in the United States, with a population of about 40,000. The town is considered one of the safest. Since its founding in 1969, only 8 murders have occurred there. In fact, this city is regarded as one of the safest places in the country. It boasts luxurious parks, numerous restaurants, and clubs for affluent guests. Additionally, many headquarters of large manufacturing companies, including international organizations, are located here. Despite this track record, even in such paradisiacal places, real nightmares can occur. The house of Rachel and Randolph Maidens was located in a guarded country club on a hill. The estate covered a total of 600 hectares and featured an award-winning private golf course known as the No. 1 Governor's Club. The club was one of the wealthiest and most prestigious neighborhoods in the city. The couple's villa was 5,000 square meters in size and cost a fortune. It seemed like a real fortress where one could start a family and run a business. Rachel Elizabeth Maidens was a 34-year-old orthodontist who had her private practice in the city's business district. She was a very beautiful woman, naturally blonde, and a devoted mother to her daughter Natalie. Rachel attended a Catholic private school in Nashville and then went to a college in South Birmingham, followed by a dental school in Florida. Throughout her education, Rachel received numerous awards. The successful beauty also showed achievements in tennis. Her accomplishments included a prestigious scholarship. The crowning achievement of her academic success was completing her specialist training at the Children's National Medical Center in Washington, D.C. Despite her young age, the woman had a brilliant career. Thanks to her successes, she managed to open her own practice. She began publishing articles in professional journals and regularly gave lectures at conferences. However, not everything in her life was so successful. While still studying, on December 3, 2003, her father Richard was arrested for selling oxycodone. The man was a respected pharmacist but was involved in the trade of prescription drugs. Although law enforcement had just begun investigating his case, he was so afraid of losing his reputation that he took his own life just 2 days after his arrest. The family's nightmares didn't stop there, as the police continued to investigate all family members. The bank accounts of Rachel, her mother, and her brother were seized. The investigations dragged on for several years. Rachel's mother was fined $15,000, marking the end of the dark phase in their lives. Many close friends and family members claimed that all this caused great harm to her emotional state. However, this didn't stop her from pursuing professional success. She endured all these difficulties steadfastly and continued to develop her own activities. The woman still wanted to be the best in her profession, striving for wealth and independence. She managed to overcome the family's financial crisis and the terrible loss of a loved one, subsequently rehabilitating herself. Rachel took her life back into her own hands. Her husband Randy, as he was known in his close circle, grew up in Georgia. After high school, he attended the Georgia Tech College of Technology. Gradually, he became a well-paid pharmaceutical sales manager. But by the time of the tragic events, all of this had collapsed, and Randy was unemployed. Only 3 months before the described events, a noticeable change in his behavior had occurred, causing many problems. Rachel reported that he quickly descended into uncontrolled alcoholism. There was also suspicion that he was simultaneously consuming various medications, which exacerbated the harmful effects. During this time, several witnesses observed him entering a restaurant heavily intoxicated and harassing customers and staff. One of the employees felt compelled to call the emergency number 911. The young woman who made the emergency call identified the man as Randy Maidens, as he had dined here several times with his wife. A few minutes after the first call, She called emergency services again because she was even more worried. She said that some suspicious items had accidentally fallen out of the man's bag, including a shotgun and a suspiciously large bottle that looked like the painkiller Tylenol. The boorish guest gathered everything and then tried to leave the establishment. The waitress managed to persuade him to stay. The patrol officers who arrived at the scene immediately noticed that the man was behaving inappropriately, but couldn't say for sure whether he was drunk or under the influence of something stronger. Randy became anxious. He wanted to leave under the pretext that his wife had called him and asked him to come home. The waitress offered to contact his wife, but he refused to provide her phone number. The man tried to get into his vehicle, but the police officers didn't allow it. During the search of his car, another shotgun was found on the back seat. Despite these oddities, the man was not arrested. Several witnesses saw him being picked up by someone in a car that evening, someone who would never allow him to drive while intoxicated. When Randy was in such situations, he always asked that no one call his wife. The man complained that he was often the victim of her anger and was afraid of upsetting her. Considering his inappropriate behavior, this reaction seemed quite natural. On the evening of April 21, 2013, Rachel's mother Betty called the Brentwood Police Department and asked the officers to check her daughter's property. The woman immediately said that Randy was on the verge of taking his own life. She was worried because she couldn't speak with Rachel. Betty had tried calling her daughter for a long time, but the phone was answered by her husband, who refused to hand the phone to his wife. Finally, the woman lost her composure and threatened to call the police, which didn't work, so she had to keep her promise. The officers arrived at the house within minutes and immediately noticed that the curtains were drawn throughout the house. Since no one responded to knocking on the door, there was no way to see what was happening inside. Fortunately, the garage door was open. The police officers could enter the house and called out the residents by name. Neither Randy nor Rachel were in the house. Suddenly, a child responded to their calls. A 2-year-old girl named Natalie was on the first floor and was crying. The child refused to say what had happened and kept repeating the same sentence through tears. "Daddy is gone. Daddy is gone." During the inspection on the first floor, one of the officers stepped into the large hallway. Leaning over the balcony railing, he saw a blood-splattered wall and a shotgun lying on a couch on the ground floor. Rachel was found in the corridor between the living room and the hallway leading to the master bedroom. She showed no signs of life. She had been shot like at a shooting gallery, 8 shots from a 9mm pistol and 2 shotgun shells in the back. The victim was wrapped in a blanket. The investigation made it clear that someone had tried to wipe the blood from the walls, and visible stains were left on the floor. Naturally, the husband of the murdered victim, Randy Maidens, was immediately put on the wanted list. Helicopters and SWAT teams were deployed to prevent the suspect from escaping. The upscale, residential area looked like a Hollywood blockbuster. The police officers actively worked with the victim's neighbors, trying to find out where the man might have gone. When the victim's mother heard the shocking news, she immediately came to pick up her grandchild. Her son-in-law was considered particularly dangerous due to his inappropriate behavior lately. It was expected that he would remain armed, which is why a warning was issued. Neighbors of the family confirmed that they had seen the fugitive on numerous occasions in an inappropriate state. On the kitchen table in the deceased's villa, a note was found. In it, Randy apologized profusely to his daughter and confessed that he loved her very much. He wrote that he was forced to flee because of his terrible deed, but didn't say what he had done. The man thanked all his wife's relatives for the years they had given him. Randy confessed that he could no longer endure the humiliations he experienced daily from his wife. He wrote that since the beginning of their relationship, she had morally executed him every night and treated him like dirt. After 7 years, he simply lost patience. On that fateful evening, his wife had started to harass him in the same way, and that was the last straw. The loving father wanted to take care of his daughter Natalie and apologized several times to the child because he couldn't take it anymore and gave up. He also emphasized that he didn't want the girl to stay with her mother and asked that custody be transferred to his wife's relatives on Rachel's side of the family. When the experts familiarized themselves with the content of the letter, the main suspect was still on the run. According to some experts, his letter could be interpreted not only as a confession, but also as a farewell note. This made the search efforts even more complicated and indicated that the man might already be deceased. Strangely, a car belonging to the man was parked in the driveway of the property. Inside, they found $7,000 in cash in a large bag in the trunk. Another approximately $3,000 in cash was found in the house. By checking phone records, the officers could determine that Randy had called his lawyer on the evening of the murder. Apparently, the man's original plan was to kill his wife and then take off with the money to start a new life. But then something went wrong, and he wrote the letter. Perhaps it was just staged to cover his tracks. But then why didn't he take his car? What could have prevented him? Especially since he still had enough time. Law enforcement suspected that it might have had something to do with Betty's calls. The woman called the police, which could have thwarted the criminal's plans. To the police's surprise, the search was of short duration. 12 hours after the search for the murderer began, Randy simply came out of the woods behind his house with his hands up. The man surrendered to the authorities without offering resistance. He immediately accused his wife of psychologically harassing him for years. The pressure had become particularly intense when he lost his job. Because of this behavior of his beloved wife, he had practically slipped into a life on the edge of society. In his defense, Randy said that he was Rachel's third husband, as the others couldn't endure her constant nagging either. However, this in no way justified 10 cowardly shots into his wife's back. The criminal had hardly had time to process the consequences of his prank at the restaurant 3 months earlier, and now there was also a charge of murdering his wife. It has become known that he had recently come into conflict with the law several times for minor offenses. Specifically, he was stopped in his car a few months before his wife's death when he was drunk. Due to the strong smell of alcohol, the police officer was sure that Randy was drunk, but the man refused to take a test. By law, this was equivalent to drunk driving. Later, he was involved in an accident with his car for exactly the same reason. He was so drunk that he crashed into a power station and darkened almost 200 houses for several hours. A few weeks before Rachel's murder, a neighbor saw a stranger with a ski mask and 2 dogs running through the woods. It was the same place from which Randy later emerged when he surrendered to the authorities. A neighbor spoke to the stranger and recognized Randy. She approached him to find out what was going on and immediately realized that the man was heavily intoxicated or under the influence of some substance. The neighbor said he had been walking his dogs and got lost, so he walked toward her property. According to the woman, at that time he had something like a bow and arrows in his backpack, so she hurried to get away. Later, he was seen many more times engaging in similar activities, which unsettled the residents of the houses near the maiden's residence. They feared for their safety. At the end of March, proceedings for trespassing were initiated against Randy in Florida, but he got away unscathed. The investigations were simply covered up. He was probably saved by money. The most disturbing incident occurred in January 2013 during a work conference in Orlando that he attended with his wife. One evening, he visited a bar and got so drunk that he was no longer able to speak coherently. The establishment staff asked him to leave the premises, but the man began smashing dishes and cursing. Several people heard him simultaneously threaten to kill his wife, but no one took these drunken threats seriously. Several guests tried to intervene to escort the rioting guest out of the bar, but Randy started fighting, so the police had to be called again. He was eventually arrested for disorderly conduct and consuming alcohol in public, but he was released the next day. His employer learned of the incident. The pharmaceutical company was concerned about its reputation, and Randy's inappropriate behavior was taken very seriously. One of his colleagues, who wished to remain anonymous, advised the man to take a temporary leave for health reasons. However, he didn't listen and returned to his workplace 3 days later. Consequently, he was fired, During the investigations, the police conducted numerous interviews with the murderer's colleagues, all of which were under strict confidentiality. The organization's management threatened to dismiss anyone who openly discussed the incidents with their alcoholic employee. According to these individuals, the perpetrator's behavior had drastically changed in the months before the incident with his wife. At the same time, he himself didn't explain what might be related to this, but always complained about his wife and blamed her for everything. Although everyone around him couldn't believe that his wife could push him so hard, Rachel always seemed nice, calm, and reasonable. It was hard to believe. But even if the woman scolded him at home, that's no excuse for behaving unrestrainedly in public places and posing a danger to strangers. It turned out that Randy's ex-girlfriend, Larissa Farley, was trying to contact him at the time of the abuse. They had been together in high school, but their romance didn't work out, and fate separated their paths. Larissa got married, divorced, and now remembered Randy, determined to meet him again and give it another try in adulthood. She learned about Randy's marital problems and assumed that the whole thing would end in divorce. In fact, she was shocked by the recent events in Randy's life and thought she could help him get his life back on track. Larissa had known him for over a decade. They had been friends for a long time. The woman claimed that there was not a single episode in Randy's biography that could be considered a prerequisite for violent retaliation. She knew him as a mature and intelligent man who valued his family and loved his child. At the same time, she also knew the other side of him. According to her, he had lived for a long time with an alcoholic father who treated him poorly. As he got older, he had a very strained relationship with his mother, which was one of the reasons why he didn't want his daughter Natalie to be placed in the care of his own family members. Larissa suspected that his problems and difficult childhood might have broken him and that the man needed help. Employees of the company from which the murderer was dismissed claimed they knew about his problems with illegal substances. According to colleagues and even the management, he had admitted long before the incident to struggling with his addiction. Nevertheless, it was believed that he had overcome these problems and their consequences in the years before the attack. But then he relapsed. What was the real reason for this man's misconduct that led to the murder of his wife? Immediately after his arrest, the 42-year-old Randy was charged with first-degree murder. He also endangered the life of a child, which was the second charge. Additionally, the man was found guilty of tampering with evidence, as he had tried to dispose of bloodstains and the blanket in which the victim was wrapped. The investigators were sure that he intended to eliminate the evidence of the crime and then flee, presumably to Mexico, with the money he had prepared. The bail was initially set at $2.5 million. He sat behind bars and awaited his trial. At the end of June 2013, the man had still not pleaded guilty to all charges. His lawyer was one of Nashville's best defense attorneys, named David Rabin. He sought a reduction of the bail and the man's release under house arrest, as he believed that Randy was actually a victim of his wife's tyranny. The defense attorney insisted that despite the discovery of a large amount of cash in Randy's car, no documents, cards, or other evidence were found indicating that the perpetrator intended to leave the city. The defense argued that his client had had enough time to flee, but he didn't. The prosecution held a different opinion for a long time. There was even a witness who claimed to have heard about plans to flee to Mexico, but this statement later turned out to be false. The mother of the deceased filed a civil lawsuit against her son-in-law because she wanted to prevent him from accessing the financial accounts and assets that he and his wife had acquired together. She feared that Randy would once again evade justice by bribing everyone he could reach with the family's assets. The woman was sure that this was the only way the criminal had previously escaped punishment for his offenses. Rachel's mother hoped that he simply wouldn't be able to bear the court costs and that he would get what he deserved for the heinous act he had committed. Despite everything, time played into the prisoner's hands. The lawyer managed to significantly reduce his bail to $750,000. Randy immediately posted this amount. Since his mother-in-law's lawsuit was still pending, this meant that he would have to wait at least another year and a half for his hearing. The trial was scheduled for September 2014. Surprisingly, the judge even allowed Randy to continue living in the house where the murder of his wife had been committed. However, the man had numerous difficulties to contend with, as the bail conditions still applied, and he was not allowed to leave the house without notifying the Brentwood police at least 24 hours in advance. During this time, he always had to have a lawyer with him and wear a GPS monitoring device in the form of an ankle bracelet. Contact with his daughter and the family members of his murdered wife was prohibited. In the meantime, the mother-in-law continued to fight and awaited a judgment in the civil case. She eventually succeeded in obtaining a restraining order on the couple's property from the court. Nevertheless, Randy simply entered the house and took his belongings and clothes. This came to light, so the man faced a new charge of contempt of court. Thanks to the efforts of his lawyer, however, this charge was dismissed. Such brazenness seemed unthinkable, but it later turned out that the criminal got away with a lot of money thanks to his connections to the governor's club and the city's law enforcement agencies. Investigations revealed that Randy hadn't simply fled into the woods after the murder. Several neighbors said they had discovered on the morning after the massacre that someone had tried to break into their house through garage doors and regular doors. The police officers checked the club's video recordings and found that it was Randy who had tried to break into the neighbor's house. With what exact intentions the man attempted this remains unclear, as he posed a significant danger. He himself denied these facts, and gradually everything was covered up. The judge's decisions, which allowed a dangerous criminal who had lost control of himself to remain at large for a year and a half, were long criticized and rightly questioned. Randy was a true example of how fatal impunity is. He was able to remain at large during the entire period, which he owed to a good lawyer who gave him the opportunity to await his trial. Only months later, in December 2013, he was caught trying to break into a residential complex in another suburb of Nashville called Bellevue. It was a rather bizarre incident reported by one of the residents of the apartment building. According to him, Randy tried to gain access by banging on the door and pretending to be a police officer. The man sensed that something was wrong when he didn't open the door to the uninvited guest, but he heard him doing the same at other apartments, so he called the police. When the police arrived, they found Randy once again heavily intoxicated. The very next day, the judge decided to revoke his bail. Amazingly, the manic alcohol excesses continued both before and after the murder of his wife. One can hardly imagine the fear his neighbors had lived in over the past year, especially when they learned that Randy had been released on bail and was living in the family villa next to them. It seemed that the murderer would soon get what he deserved, as under Tennessee law, his offense carried the death penalty. But his experienced defense attorney had an excellent plan. Unexpectedly, for the victim's family, Randy pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and child neglect on September 29, 2014. As a result, he received only 25 years in prison. Strangely, this is not even half the maximum sentence for this catalog of offenses. The perpetrator could have received 60 years in prison. Furthermore, the murderer's lawyer managed to secure the right to parole, which will be possible under the condition of good behavior by the prisoner. Since he was 42 years old at the time of his sentencing, Randy will have the opportunity to be released at about the age of 60. During the sentencing, Randy said the following words: "Rachel, I promise to love and honor you, and I have betrayed all of that. I will live with this pain forever. No prison is worse than the one I have imposed on myself. To all of Rachel's relatives and friends, I am sincerely sorry that I have caused you so much pain and so many bad moments." The mother of the murdered victim, Betty, regarded this court ruling as a personal insult. She turned several times to higher instances to obtain a review and tightening of the sentence, but all was in vain. Randy himself commented on his lenient sentence as an opportunity to save at least one of Natalie's parents' lives. Naturally, Rachel's family was shocked by such decisions during the investigation and trial. The mother and brother turned to the public through the media to express their discontent about the matter. They also emphasized their grief over the brutal and tragic death of a beautiful, successful woman and expressed their protest by pointing out the absurd decisions of a justice system that seemed to be on the perpetrator's side. Randy was never charged with contempt of court, tampering with evidence, and previous offenses like drunk driving. Randy's lawyer responded to the accusation by conveying his client's sincere regret and condolences to the victim's family. However, Betty heard only platitudes that neither exonerated the perpetrator nor comforted her, nor could bring Rachel back. Natalie was placed in Betty's custody. The child will inherit her parents' entire estate when she comes of age. The victim's mother is still convinced that the only reason for her son-in-law's lenient sentence is his connections and his money. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourselves.
Her life was like a flash of light, bright but short. Isabella enjoyed life, loved, and dreamed as if she knew that time was limited. Fate proved cruel by ending the life story of this lovable young woman at its most beautiful moment, leaving behind only a few questions. Why? For what reason? Isabella Joy Thallas was born on June 8, 1999, in Colorado. Her father, Joshua Thallas, and her mother, Ana Hernandez Thallas, divorced when Bella and her younger sisters Lucia were still very small. It turned out that Joshua was not ready for fatherhood at all. Ana began raising her daughters alone while working and taking care of the household at the same time. It took 10 years before Joshua finally felt ready for family responsibilities. Despite the wounds of the past, Ana gave him a second chance. They got back together. However, this relationship lasted only 5 years and finally ended in a permanent separation. Later, Ana began a new life with another man with whom she had a son, Jacob Hernandez. For Isabella and Lucia, the constant arguments and reconciliations between their parents became a familiar part of life. Nevertheless, the young women kept a warm relationship with both their mother and their father. Bella was very kind-hearted and trusting. She studied accounting at Metropolitan State University of Denver, but at night she drew dress designs in her notebooks. She dreamed of becoming a fashion designer. Her side job as a model for local brands became her secret escape into the world of beauty, while her younger sister Lucia consciously chose the practical path of criminal justice. Because of the difficult relationship between their mother and father, both sisters unconsciously avoided serious relationships. At 20 years old, Bella was convinced that love was only a beautiful myth. But on the very day when she met a young man named Darian Simon at another photo shoot, her opinion changed. Darian was 5 years older than Bella. He worked as a photographer, owned a studio, and was also a co-creator of the clothing brand Be a Good Person. Darian and Bella had a lot in common: a love of fashion, beauty, and photography. He, too, had grown up in an incomplete family and did not believe in love. They immediately grew close and began dating, but at first they kept their relationship secret. Only Lucia knew that Bella was in love, and when their mother found out, she immediately began to worry about her eldest daughter. She did not want Bella to repeat her mistakes. She did not want Bella to marry too early and regret it later. The mother watched her daughter closely, while Darian and Isabella's feelings became stronger and stronger. Soon they stopped hiding their relationship. In April of 2020, a serious conflict broke out between Ana and Bella. In an emotional reaction, the young woman packed her things and moved into Darian's new apartment. This rushed step later became a source of endless guilt for her mother. Anna was convinced that the tragedy could have been avoided if Bella had stayed at home. Over time, the relationship between mother and daughter improved. They reconciled. Because of that, the family was able to celebrate two important events together: Bella's 21st birthday and Lucia's 19th birthday. Their birthdays were only a few days apart. On June 7, 2020, a joyful celebration took place on the rooftop of a respected restaurant. The mother had organized everything down to the smallest detail to make that day special. The sisters glowed with happiness as they posed for family photos. Those pictures, which captured their carefree smiles, would later become priceless memories. The cake Anna had ordered for the celebration was so beautiful that no one dared to cut it into pieces. Bella took the cake home and sent her mother a photo the next morning, showing herself eating a piece of cake for breakfast. Only 2 days later, a terrible tragedy happened. June 10th, 2020 was an ordinary day. Darian and Bella woke up late. In the afternoon, the young woman planned to meet her mother so she could finally receive her long-awaited birthday gift. Darian planned to invite a friend over that evening so they could play video games together. The young man noticed that his beloved dog, a pit bull mix, was not feeling well. The dog seemed sluggish and sad. At 11:30 in the morning, Darian and Bella went outside with the dog. Bella held the leash, while Darian carried the dog waste bags. The couple headed toward a nearby building in downtown Denver, hoping that the fresh air would help the animal feel better and become lively again. When they reached a bench, Darian sat down. Bella remained standing with the dog. They spoke calmly to each other, while also trying to encourage the dog to relieve itself in the bushes. Suddenly, an aggressive shout came from a dark window of the neighboring building. "Hey, are you going to train your dog here or yell at it?" Darian tensed up. He looked toward the dark window, but he could not see the stranger's face. Troubling thoughts rushed through his mind. Who is this man? Why is he so hostile? Darian tried to remain calm and answered, "My dog is well trained. He has been with me for 4 years." He stood up from the bench, walked over to Bella, and took the leash so they could go somewhere else. At that moment, his eyes caught movement in the window, and he saw the barrel of a rifle pointed directly at them. "Are you aiming at me?" Darian managed to ask. Then the shooting began. That morning, 19-year-old Lucia took her younger brother to a friend's house and then drove to a cafe to order lunch. While she was waiting for her order, one of Bella's friends called and asked, "Hello, how are you? When was the last time you spoke to your sister? Do you know where Bella is? Maybe you should call her." Lucia did not understand what was happening, but the call worried her. The young woman called her sister, but Bella did not answer the phone. Lucia found that suspicious and located her sister through a special app. She learned that Bella's phone was near Darian's home. Lucia calmed down. She assumed her sister was at home and that everything was fine. Only a few minutes later, however, Lucia received a message from a friend asking her to contact Darian's family. The message contained a link to a report about a shooting. The tragedy had happened near Darian's home. The message sounded extremely alarming. Lucia immediately called her mother. It turned out that Anna was in a nearby store, not far from the cafe where Lucia was waiting for her lunch. Mother and daughter immediately agreed to meet and go to the hospital together. From the doctors, they learned that one person had died and another had been seriously injured. Anna began asking the nurses about her daughter, Isabella Thallas, but no one recognized that name. When she asked about Darian Simon, she was told that he was in the surgical department. Anna ran desperately through the hospital. No one could give her a clear explanation of what had happened or tell her where Bella was. The mother grabbed her phone and began feverishly searching the internet for information. Suddenly, her eyes fell on a report from the crime scene. In drone footage, a lifeless body could be seen covered with a sheet. Only one foot was visible, but that was enough. The mother immediately recognized Bella by her shoes and by the pedicure they had done together before her birthday. Anna understood. Her Isabella had died in the shooting. At that moment, her world collapsed. A wave of grief overtook Anna. How? Why her Bella? So cheerful, so kind-hearted, a young woman who wished harm on no one. How could something like this happen? She had not deserved such cruelty. Lucia called her father, told him about the tragedy, and then drove to the place where her sister had been killed so she could see with her own eyes what had happened there. Police officers and crime scene technicians were still working at the scene. They did not speak with Lucia. The young woman felt completely helpless and useless, but she wanted to understand what had happened to Bella. Lucia remembered everything she had learned in college about forensic science and began looking more closely at the crime scene. She counted 56 yellow markers indicating pieces of evidence. Then she noticed that someone was holding a dog and pulling it by the leash. Lucia walked toward the dog, and the man holding him told her that the dog had been found on a nearby street. Later, investigators were able to reconstruct the course of events. After aggressive assaults were directed at the couple with the dog, the stranger withdrew into another room, took an assault rifle belonging to his friend, and returned to the window. In the next moment, shots rang out, 24 rounds, one after another, with such speed that no one had time to understand what was happening. The first victim was Bella. She had not said a word to the shooter, but that did not stop him. Darian saw a bullet hit Bella in the back, and she fell to the ground. When he tried to run, he too was struck by a burst of gunfire. The shooter disappeared as suddenly as he had appeared. Darian was bleeding heavily and tried to roll away from the cursed window. 2 gunshot wounds. Hellish pain. He kept losing consciousness. He vaguely remembered the screams of people who had rushed over because of the noise. Someone ripped off his own belt and tied it around the young man's hip to stop the bleeding from the injured artery. That simple but decisive actions and saved his life. "Where is Bella? What happened to her?" Darian gasped, but he received no answer. The ambulance took him to the hospital in critical condition. Doctors fought for Darian's life, and fortunately, they were able to save him. The killer was quickly found. He was 36-year-old Michael Close. After the shooting, he tried to hide in the mountains with his SUV and weapons, but witnesses to the tragedy helped identify him, and the perpetrator was arrested. Michael was arrested and charged with the murder of Isabella and the attempted murder of Darian. However, he pleaded not guilty, even though numerous weapons were found in his vehicle, including the very rifle used in the shooting. Michael was also charged in connection with illegal weapons and a prohibited high-capacity magazine. Before this incident, The man had no criminal record and no problems with the law, which made what happened even more shocking. As it turned out, there had been a serious conflict between Michael and his girlfriend the day before the tragedy. According to her, Michael had long suffered from depression and mental disorders and had used illegal substances, which further worsened his condition. After the shooting, Michael contacted his girlfriend and confessed what he had done. He told her that he had shot 2 people, and there was remorse in his voice. His girlfriend begged him to turn himself in to the authorities, but he refused because he was in a state of extreme emotional instability. Worried about Michael's behavior, his girlfriend immediately called the police and told them where he was, hoping to prevent another tragedy. Michael's friend, a police officer named Daniel Politica, told investigators that he had received a message from him after the shooting. In it, Michael complained that he had become angry at a couple with a dog and had begun shooting with an AK-47 style rifle that he had taken from Daniel Politica's room. Darian's and Bella's families filed a civil lawsuit against Daniel Politica, accusing him of negligence. Daniel Politica later left the Denver Police Department. Later, a representative of the police department reviewed the case and concluded that Politica had not committed any obvious policy violation. According to that conclusion, he could not have known that Michael would enter his room that day and take the weapon. The civil lawsuit filed against him was settled by his insurance company, which paid the affected families $500,000 with no admission of responsibility. Joshua Thallas, the father of the late Isabella, felt a fierce sense of injustice. He was especially outraged by the behavior of Daniel Politica, Michael's friend, who showed no real remorse over the fact that he had enabled the killer to access a weapon so easily. What outraged Joshua most, however, was something else. The fact that the weapon's owner was not held criminally responsible for improper storage of the firearm. In his painful reflections, Joshua kept returning to the possible racial background of the crime. His daughter Bella and her boyfriend Darian were mixed race. Had Michael really shot at the couple only because of the dog, or was there another motive? The family received no answers to these questions, neither from the perpetrator nor from investigators. Darian underwent a series of complicated surgeries to restore movement in his injured leg. But the physical injuries were nothing compared to the emotional wounds. Post-traumatic stress disorder and the tormenting guilt he felt toward the late Bella and her family gave him no peace for a long time. In his mind, he kept returning to one question: what could have provoked Michael? He found no answer. Some of Bella's friends openly voiced their doubts. Could Darian not have protected her? She fell, and he turned around and ran away. These words and accusations were especially painful for Darian. During sessions with a psychologist, he analyzed every second of that terrible day, June 10th, in detail. The specialist helped him understand that in that moment, he had not been physically able to help Bella, and that his instinct for self-preservation was a natural reaction of his body. Michael Close stubbornly denied his guilt. His lawyer built the defense around the claim of insanity. The defense insisted that the roots of the tragedy lay in the defendant's traumatic childhood, which had been worsened by a series of failures, job losses, breakups, and stress connected to the pandemic. Surveillance camera footage served as undeniable evidence. It clearly showed Michael calmly opening the blinds and beginning to shoot while the unsuspecting Darian and Bella were merely trying to lead the dog away and avoid conflict. September of 2022 became a turning point in this case. After lengthy proceedings, the jury unanimously found Michael Close guilty of brutally murdering Isabella and attempting to murder Darian. On November 4th of that same year, the court handed down its final sentence. He received life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of Bella, as well as an additional 48 years in prison for the attempted murder of Darian and more than $37,000 in restitution. During the sentencing, Michael sat with his head lowered and cried quietly. His tears, however, did not soften the severity of the punishment for his crimes. Isabella Thallas was buried in an elegant Dolce & Gabbana dress, the very dress her mother had not been able to give her on her tragic birthday. The tragedy fundamentally changed Lucia's life. She gave up her dream of becoming a police officer and later turned toward a path of helping victims and honoring Bella's memory, determined to become someone who truly understands the pain of victims and their families. Bella's mother, Ana Hernandez Thallas, still feels compassion for Michael Close despite everything. Her faith does not allow her to see him only as a monster, but as a human being broken by the circumstances of his life. Near the place where the young woman died, a memorial garden called Bella Joy Gardens was created, with a large image of Bella on the wall. In the garden, there is also a special area for walking pets. In the state of Colorado, the Isabella Joy Thallas Act was passed, tightening the rules for reporting lost or stolen firearms. From then on, gun owners are required to report the loss or theft of a firearm to the police within 5 days. This stricter law is intended to help prevent similar tragedies in the future. Thank you for watching, and please take care of yourselves. It was shortly before Christmas in a quiet suburb of Mansfield, Texas, when police received an emergency call. When they arrived, the officers discovered that the garage door was already open and that the side door to the house was unlocked. As the officers entered the home, they were met with a shocking sight. Rick Walmsley, the well-liked neighborhood accountant, and his lively wife, Susanna "Susie" Walmsley, had been murdered inside their home in the middle of the night. What made the scene even more disturbing was the impression that the murders had taken place some time before the emergency call was made. In addition, the couple's teenage son had disappeared without a trace. This case remains highly controversial. Although many questions were answered, many points still remain unclear. Rick and Susie Walmsley had been best friends when they attended high school together in Oklahoma in the 1970s. At that time, they were also a couple. Many years later, while Rick was studying at Oklahoma State University and Susie was attending a Christian college, they decided to renew their relationship. Soon after, marriage followed, and then the birth of their children. Susie gave birth to their daughter Sarah in 1978, and 6 years later to their son Andrew. Rick earned a degree as a certified public accountant and became successful in the oil and gas industry. Over the years, the family moved several times to support Rick's career development and eventually settled in Fort Worth, Texas. There, Rick opened his own accounting practice from a home office. The Walmsley family moved into a prestigious residential neighborhood. By that time, Sarah was already a young mother and had moved into her own apartment. Andrew, who was 19 years old, had just finished high school and was attending a junior college while combining his studies with a part-time job at a miniature golf course. Rick and Susie had a very happy marriage. In July of 2003, they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with close friends and family. In December of that same year, Susie was preparing for what was supposed to be their 25th Christmas together. She decorated the inside and outside of the house. A large Christmas tree stood in the living room, lovingly covered with ornaments, and the presents were wrapped and spread out on the floor around the tree. It was a picturesque scene of a suburban Christmas celebration in Mansfield. That peaceful image lasted only until 11:41 p.m. On December 11th, when a 911 call came in and emergency services, along with investigators, arrived in that quiet neighborhood. At 11:41 p.m. on December 11th, the 911 dispatcher in Mansfield received a call from the Walmsley family home. Nothing could be heard on the other end of the line, except silence. Still, the dispatcher sent police to the house because he felt that something was wrong. Mansfield police officer Patrick Nix was reportedly the first to arrive at the scene. A short time later, his colleagues joined him, and together they examined the property and looked through the windows. Since no one responded when they rang the doorbell, but they noticed that the side door to the garage was open, the officers entered the house. As they walked through the kitchen, they noticed that the landline telephone had been taken off the hook and placed on the kitchen table. In the living room, they found Susie, whose body already felt cold. In the hallway near the door, they found Rick lying in a pool of blood, and it was obvious that he could no longer be saved. Soon afterward, paramedics arrived and confirmed that Susie and Rick were dead. The house was sealed off, and the investigation began. The couple's neighbors were shocked that something like this had happened in their neighborhood and appeared visibly confused and frightened in interviews. They also said that the Walmsleys had been wonderful people, and that they could not understand who could have done something like this. The autopsy showed that Susie had died from a gunshot wound and also had 7 stab wounds. It was believed that those wounds may have been inflicted after she was already dead. Investigators concluded that Susie had been sleeping in the living room, possibly watching television, when she was attacked. On the carpet in front of the fireplace in that room, investigators found 2 bloody handprints that may have belonged to the killer. They also found a bullet, 2 pieces of a broken blue plastic hair clip, and another piece of plastic on the floor nearby. Rick suffered the same fate as his wife, although possibly not as quickly. But bullet holes in the headboard of the bed in the master bedrooms suggested that the attack on Rick began in that room and then moved into the hallway. Because no blood was found in the bedroom, investigators believed that Rick had been awakened by the gunshots and either ran out of the room or possibly tried to attack the intruder there. Everything indicated that Rick had fought back against the attacker. On his left hand and around his wrist was a strand of the attacker's hair, which became a valuable piece of evidence. Rick had also been shot and stabbed in the back about 11 times. Police promised to search every corner of the house thoroughly in order to find the killer. The hair from Rick's wrist and the broken hair clip from the living room floor were taken for DNA analysis. The house was examined for fingerprints, and investigators searched every room. They looked for signs that the Walmsleys had been robbed. One possible theory was that the parents had awakened while trying to scare off a burglar. However, that theory was rejected when almost $15,000 in cash was found in the master bedroom. Even if a burglar had searched the house only superficially, that money would have been easy to find. Other valuables were also untouched, and there were no signs of forced entry on the doors or windows. Long before the tragedy, there had been tension inside the Walmsley family. It emerged that Sarah had been thrown out of the house as a teenager because of her inappropriate behavior, and later became pregnant at 19. She had a difficult relationship with the father of her daughter, a man named Todd Cleveland. She and her younger brother Andrew also argued frequently. Sarah's former boyfriend said that Susie and Rick were suspicious of strangers and believed that some people were interested in them only because they hoped to gain something from the family. In that sense, the family's growing wealth seemed to be more of a burden than an advantage in their lives. According to some reports, the situation at home was tense, although very little of that was visible from the outside. The Walmsleys had an agreement that the parents would financially support their children only if the children completed a college education. This arrangement did not work with Sarah, but Andrew initially agreed to the conditions. He was given a new white Mustang. His insurance was paid. His parents gave him money for expenses, and he continued living in the family home without paying rent. The problem was that he did not keep his side of the agreement. Andrew eventually dropped out of college. When his parents found out, they withdrew their financial support, although they did not go so far as to throw him out of the house. The 19-year-old then began spending most of his time with a group of friends at a local computer club in order to escape the tension at home. There, his friend James introduced him to his 17-year-old sister, Chelsea Richardson. Sarah Walmsley was informed of her parents' deaths early that morning, on the same day they were found. Andrew, however, was initially nowhere to be found. Police then turned to the media and asked the public to report any information about the teenagers' whereabouts. While crime scene technicians were still working at the house, the Mustang eventually pulled up in front of the home, and Andrew Walmsley and his girlfriend Chelsea Richardson got out. It turned out that the couple had been staying at Chelsea Holmes' home in the days before the murders, and after seeing the news that morning, they immediately returned to the house. Detective Ralph Standifer asked the young couple to follow him to the police station for an interview. Andrew's questioning lasted about 45 minutes. He explained that he had not been home for several days, had not had contact with his parents, and had spent the entire time with Chelsea. A small scratch was noticed on his hands. Otherwise, however, there was nothing unusual about his behavior, so the officers let him go. Before that, he had agreed to a search of his car. During a conversation with Sarah, Andrew said that investigators would most likely find their mother's blood in the car because she had recently cut her finger and, for some reason, had driven the car around the block. Chelsea's statement matched Andrew's version completely, namely that the two of them had spent the last 2 days together. Andrew and Chelsea had been inseparable since they met in the fall of the previous year and began a relationship. They often spent their days, and sometimes their nights, playing a game called Yu-Gi-Oh!, a Japanese trading card game in which players use cards to battle each other through fantastic monsters. The main character is portrayed as a childish and weak boy who transforms into a hero during the game. The bond between Chelsea and Andrew, formed through their shared passion for this game, became so strong that they even began thinking about marriage. Chelsea's mother supported the relationship and liked Andrew very much. Rick and Susie Walmsley, however, openly expressed disappointment in the relationship. They wanted a very different kind of partner for their son. The Richardson family lived in Everman, a suburb of Fort Worth that was considered a working-class area and stood in sharp contrast to the million-dollar homes lining the streets of Mansfield. Chelsea had experienced the sudden death of her beloved father from a heart attack several years earlier. Her mother sometimes had to work 3 different jobs at the same time in order to keep the family financially afloat. Even so, the Richardsons were considered generous and helpful people. Chelsea was an extroverted young woman and was apparently very popular at her school. Her cheerful personality even earned her the nickname Bubbles. Her best friend, Susanna Toledano, was also considered extremely generous. When Chelsea Richardson had a conflict with her own mother, Susanna was taken into the Richardson home, where she lived for several months. The trio of Susanna, Andrew, and Chelsea were together on the night Andrew's parents were murdered. Chelsea's former boyfriend, Jeremy Lavender, confirmed that the group had been at his home that night. After they said goodbye, he spoke with Chelsea on the phone for several hours and ended the conversation at about 3:20 in the morning. Sarah Walmsley told police that she suspected the father of her daughter, Todd Cleveland, might have had something to do with her parents' fate. Shortly before the murders, she had threatened to take away his custody rights to the child. The two argued frequently about custody. There was also another suspicious incident that had taken place about a month before the murders. In early November, Sarah was driving home from horseback riding lessons with her parents in a Grand Cherokee when they decided to go to a neighboring town to eat. Suddenly, they felt a violent impact on the vehicle. Rick initially thought a large rock had been thrown at the car. But when he stopped to check, the family was shocked to discover that it had not been a rock, but a bullet. There was a bullet hole in the trunk of their vehicle. Frightened and shaken, Susie immediately made 2 phone calls. First, she called her son Andrew. She found it strange that the vehicle that had previously been following them, and from which the shot had apparently been fired, was said to be a white Mustang, and she suspected that Andrew might have been inside it. The second call was to the police to report the incident. Sarah later suggested that Todd might have been responsible for the tragedy and only afterward remembered the incident with the car. Wondering why her mother had called her younger sons first at that time, Sarah and Andrew were supposed to inherit a life insurance policy from their father worth $1 million. The family home was estimated to be worth about $1.6 million. In addition, there was about $100,000 in cash and other assets that would go to the children. Investigators looked into Sarah's suspicion and eventually removed Todd from the list of suspects. Given the financial motives and the strained family relationships, Sarah and Andrew themselves eventually became the focus of the investigation and were, for a time, considered the main suspects. DNA analysis and fingerprints, however, showed no match to any member of the family. There was no sign that either child was connected to the crime scene. The forensic examination of Andrew's Mustang did confirm that there was blood on the back seat and the headrests. It turned out that the car had been thoroughly cleaned, and investigators' attempts to obtain a usable DNA sample were unsuccessful, so they could not determine whose blood it was. After several months, the investigation stalled. Investigators needed more information and decided to convene a grand jury and issue subpoenas. Jeremy Lavender, Chelsea's former boyfriend, testified under oath that Andrew and his friends had been with him that night, providing them with a strong alibi. Chelsea's best friend Susanna said the same thing. After she testified, Susanna agreed to provide a DNA sample as well, which became a turning point in the investigation. Susanna Toledano was not an unpopular or unsuccessful student. She had moved from Illinois to Texas a few years earlier, was considered a loner at school, often skipped classes, and repeatedly had conflicts with her mother. Chelsea Richardson became Susanna's emotional support. The two became so close that Chelsea dedicated an entire page to her in the school yearbook. She even wrote a poem for her titled Friends Forever. When investigators finally determined that the strand of hair found in Rick's hand, as well as DNA from the broken hair clip at the crime scene, matched Susanna's DNA, they realized that there was much more behind the story. Susanna, who could now clearly be linked to the crime scene, was charged with 2 counts of murder, which theoretically carried the death penalty. She was arrested in Chicago, where she was visiting her uncle. Susanna faced a possible death sentence if she did not reach an agreement with prosecutors. At first, Susanna told police that on the night of the murders she had been with a friend, a 25-year-old man named Hilario Cardenas. She said Hilario had a gun and needed money, which was why he entered the Walmsley house alone in the middle of the night while she remained outside. She claimed that she heard gunshots and ran toward the house, and that her hair was left behind after Rick begged her to stop the attack. According to her account, however, she had not actively taken part. She said she could not prevent what happened and was not responsible for it. So who was Hilario Cardenas? As it turned out, Hilario was the night manager of the computer club where Andrew and Chelsea regularly spent time. As the father of a young daughter and someone struggling financially, Susanna claimed that Hilario had increased his contact with the Walmsleys after learning about Andrew's family wealth. During questioning, Hilario denied taking part in the murders. He did admit, however, that he had bought a gun for $200 at Andrew Walmsley's request. Andrew, Chelsea, and Susanna had wanted to use it for target practice on a friend's farm. Hilario insisted that he had nothing to do with the murders. Investigators looked for confirmation of his statements and decided to visit the owner of the farm where the teenagers had allegedly practiced. The owner, a woman named Ruth Brostrom, knew Chelsea through Chelsea's mother and confirmed the story. A few months before the murders, Chelsea and Susanna had come to the roughly 3-acre property and carried out what they described as target practice, taking turns shooting at a small pond. Ruth had never seen or heard of Hilario Cardenas, which further supported his statement. After Hilario also passed a polygraph test, investigators became more confident in his version of events. The pond on Ruth's property was later drained, and forensic specialists collected bullets from the bottom. Eventually, investigators concluded that Hilario had told the truth. The 3 teenagers had practiced their shooting skills for several months in preparation for the murders. Susanna's original story, which blamed Hilario for the killings, did not hold up under closer examination by investigators. But she was given another opportunity to tell the truth, and this time she directly accused her best friend. This time, her account was much more detailed. Night after night, the three teenagers had made plans in an internet cafe. They calculated that Andrew would inherit more than $1 million after the death of Rick and Susie, which they believed could be enough to last a lifetime. They wanted to live together. Susanna could quit her low-paying job and buy herself a new car. After they persuaded Hilario to get them a gun, and after they practiced shooting, they concluded that Susanna was the best shot. After that, they began carrying out their first plan. They wanted to shoot the gas tank of Rick's Jeep. They believed the vehicle would explode if they hit it. When Susanna drove past the Jeep with Andrew in his Mustang and fired at it, the Jeep did not explode. They then developed a second plan: to enter the house at night. They assumed it would look like a burglary. After all attempts to make Rick's Jeep explode failed, Susanna said Chelsea became very angry with her. Andrew and Chelsea blamed Susanna for the failure of their first plan and pressured her to finish the job. Once, they took her to the house, hid her with a gun in a closet in Andrew's bedroom, and demanded that she do it quickly so they could go home afterward. Susanna hid in the closet for several hours before coming out again and confessing to Chelsea and Andrew that she could not bring herself to do it. But in the early morning hours of December 11th, they tried again, and this time there was no turning back. Susanna said that she was the last one to enter the house. According to her version, she had the gun, while Andrew and Chelsea were holding knives. It was Susanna who found Susie on the sofa and shot her. After that, Andrew took Susanna into the bedroom, where she fired again at Rick. The bullets struck the headboard of the bed and woke the 46-year-old accountant. After Rick attacked Susanna, a struggle followed. Andrew then took control. He ordered Susanna to check on Susie and to leave the gun there. She obeyed, left the weapon behind, and took a knife. Before she left the hallway, Susanna heard Rick Wamsley, who was on his knees, ask Chelsea why she was doing all of this. Chelsea answered that it was because she was pregnant. Rick then said he would help them. Susanna told police that she did not know which of her two friends had fired the fatal Sutsat shots at Rick, or who ultimately inflicted the fatal injuries on him. She said she returned to the living room as instructed, so that Susie Wamsley would meet the same fate as her husband. During questioning, Chelsea said she did not understand what was happening and insisted that she was innocent. In exchange for her testimony against Chelsea and Andrew, Susanna Toledano was spared the death penalty, which continued to threaten her two former friends. Within the family, opinions differed. Some believed Andrew could not be a murderer. Others believed that under certain circumstances, any person was capable of anything. The statements of the former friend and roommate eventually formed the basis for the charges against both Chelsea and Andrew. Although Chelsea had repeatedly lied to investigators before settling on a final version of events, she ultimately helped strengthen the case against herself. Many of the prosecution's witnesses in Chelsea's trial were fellow inmates who testified that she had bragged to them about her involvement in the murders, or had tried to persuade them to provide an alibi for her. Her original alibi, provided by Jeremy Lavender, was disproven. Jeremy was described as a young man who was easy to influence and who believed Chelsea was his friend. He had been convinced to lie before the grand jury in order to protect her. Later, he changed his statement and admitted that he had not actually been with the teenagers that night. Chelsea, once a lively high school student, was portrayed as one of the driving forces behind the crime. She convinced Andrew that he would be better off without his family. She also convinced her best friend, who was also easy to influence and manipulate, to act for her. The jury was shown a handwritten note from Chelsea to Susanna, left shortly after Susanna's arrest, in which Chelsea begged her friend to blame Hilario and also claimed that she was pregnant by Andrew. In the note, she wrote, "All you have to tell them is that we had nothing to do with it. Tell them Hilario needed money, and that is why he robbed Andrew's family. If you do not do it for me, then do it for our child, so it has a chance at a life with mommy and daddy." She signed the message with the words, "Friends forever, Bubbles." When Susanna was asked in court whether she believed Chelsea had actually been pregnant, she said no. She knew it was an obvious lie, intended only to manipulate her further. There was no physical evidence directly connecting Chelsea or Andrew to the murders. Susanna's testimony was the only reason to believe that either of them had actively participated in the murders or had even entered the house that night. Still, the former friend's testimony proved decisive for the prosecution, and the jurors ultimately accepted Susanna's account. The jurors in Chelsea's trial needed less than 4 hours to find the 19-year-old woman guilty of murder. Andrew's trial took only about half as long. Chelsea Richardson was sentenced to death by lethal injection. Andrew Walmsley's lawyers, however, managed to convince the jurors not to send him to death row. They argued that he suffered from schizoid personality disorder and, because of that condition, was unlikely to commit violent acts in the future. Defense witnesses described Andrew during sentencing as a sad, emotionally empty person. They portrayed him as a young man who lacked the ability to properly understand love or emotional closeness in human relationships. According to his lawyer, this had been made worse by the fact that no member of his family had ever truly offered him support or guidance. Andrew Walmsley was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 2044. Hilario Cardenas was convicted as a participant in the planning of the crimes because he had witnessed several conversations about the planned murders, even though he was not believed to have actively taken part in the killings themselves. Hilario was convicted of conspiracy to commit capital murder and received a prison sentence of 50 years. Chelsea Richardson, who was considered a central instigator of the crime, spent a little more than 10 years on Texas death row. In early 2012, her legal team succeeded in having the sentence changed to life imprisonment. It was shown that the prosecution had withheld exculpatory evidence from the defense during the original trial. This included a psychological report that concluded that it was not Chelsea, but Susanna Toledano who had been the true driving force behind the conspiracy. The report also contained a statement from Susanna in which she admitted that she had carried greater responsibility for the crimes than all the other participants and that she could have prevented the murders. Susanna is currently incarcerated in Texas. In the spring of 2034, she will first become eligible for parole. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourself. Gilberto Ventura Ceballos was a criminal with a long history of crime. He escaped from a prison in the Dominican Republic and eventually arrived in Panama, where he lived under false identities and continued committing crimes because he believed he would never be caught. For his new offenses, he enlisted the help of his friend Alcibiades Mendez. Together, they abducted and murdered 5 young people. Gilberto Ventura Ceballos was born on July 6, 1975 in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic. He entered Panama on July 15, 2008, on a 3-month tourist visa while fleeing justice in his home country. He used false documents under the name Fermin Antonio Taveras Ramirez. This was not the only identity associated with him. Reports also linked him to the names Fermin Taveras, Angel Betancourt, Henry Herrera Ceballos, and Carlos Alberto Aguirre Valencia. These false identities helped him conceal his criminal past and move between countries. His preferred targets were members of Chinese business communities. According to records cited in reports about his past, in 2003, he defrauded the owners of an educational institution of 88,000 Dominican pesos. He was arrested for the fraud and spent several weeks in prison. In October 2004, he was arrested again and sentenced to 20 years in prison for abducting a Chinese merchant named Vani Han, whose family reportedly paid 500,000 Dominican pesos for his release. Ventura carried out that abduction by posing as a police officer. A retired soldier allegedly assisted him and threatened the victim with a handgun. Released. The merchant said that he had not been physically tortured, but had suffered severe psychological abuse because his captors threatened to kill him every day. When they finally let him go, they abandoned him in bushes in an isolated area without assistance. Ventura was arrested and prosecuted, but he did not serve the sentence because he escaped from prison on November 30, 2004. He remained hidden in the Dominican Republic for several years. Convinced that the police could arrest him at any moment, he eventually decided to leave for Panama. After arriving in Panama, Ventura continued using a false name. With those documents, he opened a bank account and began working as a salesman in a store. After some time, he met a woman, fell in love with her, and married her. Through the mobile phone trade in La Correra, he became acquainted with a Dominican man named Alcibiades Mendez, who was widely known as José Celular. Mendez had arrived in Panama years earlier and operated mobile phone businesses. He had also faced problems with the authorities over unpaid child support and alleged fraud, although no action had prevented him from continuing his business activities. After the two men had built mutual trust, Ventura proposed a criminal partnership. His plan was to target the Chinese community again, this time in Panama. He wanted to abduct the children of successful Chinese merchants and demand large ransoms. Mendez agreed. Ventura had already faced accusations of fraud in Panama, but one complaint had ended in a private settlement. Nevertheless, continued looking for ways to obtain money quickly through crime. The first victim of Ventura and Mendez was 18-year-old Yesenia Argelis Lucam, the daughter of the owners of a well-known store in La Correra. Yesenia was a highly motivated student at the Technological University of Panama and earned excellent grades. She dreamed of working in Panamanian television. From an early age, she balanced her studies with helping in her parents' store, and local shopkeepers knew and respected her. Investigators concluded that the two men planned their crimes for months before carrying out the first abduction on October 20th, 2010. Early that morning, Yesenia left the apartment above her parents' store, got into her car, and headed to the university. There were few vehicles on the road. The abductors used two cars, one driven by Mendez and another driven by Ventura. They followed Yesenia along Avenida Las Americas until they were close to her route to the university. Mendez deliberately struck the rear of Yesenia's car and got out. She stopped and lowered the window. She recognized him because he worked in the same mobile business environment as her family and was familiar to her. While she focused on Mendez, Ventura approached from the second vehicle with a handgun. He pointed the weapon at her, restrained her, and forced her into the kidnapper's vehicle. They then took her to a rented house in the El Trapichito sector of La Chorrera. At the house, the offenders confined Yesenia in a pit that had been prepared beneath the floor near the bathroom area. They recorded her asking her family to pay a ransom and warning them not to contact the police. The kidnappers demanded $200,000. Her family could not raise that amount and offered $25,000. The negotiations continued for 2 days, but no agreement was reached. On October 22, 2010, Ventura decided to kill Yesenia. He told Mendez to go outside and set off strings of firecrackers. When Mendez returned, he found that Ventura had already shot her. The explosions were intended to conceal the gunshot. The two men covered her body with soil and later sealed the pit beneath the floor. After Yesenia was killed, communication between the kidnappers and her family stopped. Her relatives did not know what had happened and continued hoping that she was alive. They printed missing person posters and placed them near their home and in other parts of the city. The family later told the media that when they first received the ransom call, they had believed it might be a cruel joke. When they received the recording of Yesenia, however, they understood that the danger was real. For months, they received no reliable information about her fate. About a month and a half after the first abduction, Ventura and Mendez struck again. Their second victim was 27-year-old Yong Jian Wu, known as Ken, who owned a business called Novedades Angelina. On December 9, 2010, he met Mendez to complete what he believed was a purchase of several BlackBerry mobile phones. The offer was a trap designed to bring him to the house in El Trapichito, where Ventura was waiting. Ventura drew a handgun while Mendez restrained, handcuffed, and gagged Ken. They transported him into the house concealed inside a large plastic water tank so that neighbors would not become suspicious. They placed him in another pit, this one prepared beneath the kitchen floor, and forced him to record a ransom message. The kidnappers initially demanded $400,000. Ken's wife, who was pregnant with their second child, and other relatives negotiated with the abductors. The final ransom was $83,000. The family delivered the money on December 14, 2010, after being led through a complicated series of instructions intended to expose any police surveillance. They were told that Ken would be released within hours. The family waited, but he never returned. After collecting the ransom, Ventura gave Mendez $20,000 for his role in the crime. Once again, Mendez went outside and set off firecrackers. When he returned, Ken had been shot in the head. The two men buried him beneath the kitchen floor and covered the area with soils and concrete. Even though the global positioning system on Ken's phone reportedly continued indicating the El Trapichito area, the authorities did not locate him there. His family later accused the police of failing to act effectively on that crucial information. Because the criminals had received money from Ken's family, they decided to plan another abduction. Their next target was 19-year-old Sammy Zeng Chen, the eldest of three sons of a well-known La Cora businessman. Ventura and Mendez followed him for days, but their surveillance was so conspicuous that people in the area noticed them. On September 6, 2011, the men waited near Sammy's home. Someone called the police because their vehicles appeared suspicious and obstructed a security camera. Officers arrived, recorded Mendez's information, and then allowed both men to leave. The intervention did not stop the plan. The following morning, September 7, 2011, the offenders followed Sammy's car onto the Arraiján La Correra highway and struck it from behind. This time, Sammy was not alone. His girlfriend, Georgina del Carmen Lee Chen, and his childhood friend, Joel Mauricio Lu Wong, were traveling with him. Georgina was an engineering student and had been dating Sammy for approximately 11 months. Joel had attended school and university with Sammy. Although the presence of three people had not been part of the original plan, Ventura and Mendez continued. When Sammy got out to inspect the damage, Mendez threatened him with a weapon. Ventura subdued Georgina and Joel. The kidnappers handcuffed. The three young people covered their mouths and eyes with tape, threatened them with weapons, and transported them to the same house in El Trapichito. Inside the house, the three victims were placed in a pit prepared beneath the floor of a bedroom. They were forced to record ransom messages. Ventura left to contact their families, while Mendez remained at the house to guard them. Sammy struggled and made noise. Mendez stabbed him in the left leg in an attempt to silence him. The blade damaged a major vein in his thigh, causing fatal blood loss. After Sammy died, the offenders decided that Georgina had also become a liability. She was handcuffed and buried alive beside Sammy's body. Joel was kept alive for several more days so that the kidnappers could continue negotiating. Although they used Joel to provide proof of life, their main demand was directed at the families of the three abducted students. They initially demanded $2 million. After several days of negotiations, the families agreed to pay $160,000. The first planned delivery was abandoned because Ventura believed the families were being followed by police vehicles. A later delivery was arranged in a grassy area marked with red bags. Mendez collected the money, while Ventura directed the operation by telephone. After the payment was received, Joel was killed by suffocation and buried beside his friends. In total, the criminals collected $243,000 from the ransoms connected to Ken and the final three victims. The red bags used to mark the ransom route became an important clue. Sammy's father went to nearby stores and asked whether anyone had bought an unusually large number of red bags. He obtained surveillance camera footage showing a man making such a purchase and recognized him as Alcibiades Mendez, whom he knew from the local mobile phone trade. The family gave this information to the police. On September 14, 2011, officers arrested Mendez at the home of his former partner, Inés Torres, in La Chorrera. By then, Ventura had already fled Panama. Mendez confessed and gave investigators a detailed account of the crimes. On September 15th, he led the authorities to the rented house in El Trapichito, where the bodies of all 5 victims were found buried beneath the floors. Forensic examinations established that Yesenia and Ken had died from gunshot wounds to the head. Sammy died from massive blood loss after the stab wound damaged a major vein in his thigh. Georgina and Joel died from asphyxiation after being buried alive. Mendez did not deny his participation and later apologized to the victims' families. Ventura was captured in the Dominican Republic on November 17, 2011. He had changed his appearance by lightening or altering his hair and had scars on his fingertips. Investigators believed that he had deliberately injured his fingertips in an effort to prevent identification through fingerprints. He was found hiding inside a water tank at a house in the Boca Chica area. The Dominican authorities agreed to transfer Ventura to Panama on the condition that he would not receive a sentence exceeding the maximum punishment then applicable in the Dominican Republic, which was 30 years. He was transferred to Panama and prosecuted there. Unlike Mendez, Ventura consistently denied involvement and claimed that members of the Panamanian police or military had committed the crimes. Several other people were arrested in connection with the ransom money and actions taken after the crimes. The accused included Ines Magalis Torres Flores, her sister Delmira Edith Torres, Ines Madelines Chavarria Torres, Kayla Giselle Bendibu Salazar, Mario Luis Vega, Kenny Alexander Bendibu Salazar, Roberto Antonio Mariscal Rodriguez, and others. Investigators alleged that some of them helped exchange, conceal, or spend marked ransom money, while others helped cover the burial sites with flooring. Handcuffs, ammunition, cash, and belongings linked to the victims were also found during the investigation. The judicial process moved extremely slowly. In September 2015, 4 years after the bodies had been discovered, and with no final judgment, members of Panama's Chinese community held a memorial service for the victims. Community representatives said they felt betrayed because the authorities had promised a thorough and rapid investigation, yet years had passed without justice. Some relatives reportedly had to sell businesses and suffered serious health and emotional problems after the tragedy. Ventura had no intention of remaining in custody. He had already escaped from prison in the Dominican Republic, and in Panama he began planning another escape. On December 28, 2016, he escaped from La Joyita prison during what was presented as a meeting with a lawyer. The escape involved serious security irregularities. Although Ventura was being held under high security conditions, he was moved to an area with weaker controls. Surveillance footage and statements from prison employees later indicated that Ventura and a female lawyer entered a kitchen area where he changed his appearance. He put on a wig and women's clothing and walked out of the prison. The authorities offered a reward of $50,000 and launched a major search. Investigators accused the lawyer and other accomplices of helping arrange the escape. The plan allegedly involved renting a vehicle, obtaining a wig and women's clothing, and bribing a police officer and a prison guard so that Ventura could enter the kitchen and leave the facility. During the first trial hearings in June 2017, Ventura remained at large. At those hearings, Alcibiades Mendez apologized to the victims' families and to the people of Panama. He said that Ventura had organized the abductions, selected the targets, handled the negotiations with the families, killed the first two victims, and ordered or participated in the deaths of the final three. Mendez attempted to portray himself as a subordinate participant, although he admitted his own direct involvement, including the fatal stabbing of Sammy. Ventura was recaptured on September 22, 2017, in Jaco, Costa Rica. He was using false documents under the name Carlos Alberto Aguirre Valencia. After being returned to Panama, he again denied responsibility for the 5 murders. In a judgment dated June 22, 2018, Panama's Second Superior Court sentenced Gilberto Ventura Ceballos and Alcibiades Mendez to 50 years in prison each for aggravated intentional homicide and kidnapping in connection with the deaths of Yesenia Argelis Lu Cam, Yong Jen Wu, Sammy Zheng Chen, Georgina del Carmen Li Chen, and Joel Mauricio Lu Wang. Other defendants received sentences or acquittals according to the court's findings regarding their roles. Ventura later received an additional prison sentence for escape and criminal conspiracy. Because the Dominican Republic had conditioned Ventura's transfer on a maximum sentence of 30 years, Panama's Supreme Court later reduced his 50-year sentence for the 5 murders to 30 years. The reduction was based on the International Transfer Agreement, not on a finding that he was innocent. Ventura's story still did not end there. On February 3, 2020, he escaped from the high-security La Nueva Joya prison. It was his 3rd known prison escape, when the earlier escape in the Dominican Republic was included. Investigators found evidence suggesting that people inside the prison had helped him, and surveillance footage raised further questions about security failures. After a nationwide manhunt, Ventura was recaptured on February 13, 2020, near El Salado in the district of Remedios, Chiriquí province. He appeared dehydrated and was transported under heavy security to Panama City. After a medical examination, he was returned to custody. The escape led to the resignation of Panama's public security minister and the dismissal of the government minister. The case exposed numerous inconsistencies and alleged failures by law enforcement agencies. Representatives of Panama's Chinese community said that authorities ignored important clues. The most frequently cited example involved Ken's mobile phone, whose global positioning data allegedly showed its location in El Trapichito in real time. His wife passed that information to the police, but it did not lead to a timely rescue. In the end, Gilberto Ventura Ceballos and Alcibiades Mendez abducted and murdered 5 young people for money. Even from prison, Ventura continued looking for ways to profit from the notoriety of the case. Reports revealed that he had worked on a book about the crimes, provisionally titled The Lens of Truth. Thank you for watching, and please take care of yourselves.